call, please.
Chair Laska,
Here.
Director Shirley. Here. Director Pete.
Here.
We have a forum.
Any public? Nobody here? Morning, Greg. Hi, Ron.
No members of public.
Approve the May 3rd, 23 finance committee minutes. All move to approve.
I'll second.
The motion second, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Approve May 3rd, 23 finance, oops, did that presentation draft final budget. The 23.
Thank you, Chair. At this time, we'll have our finance manager, Barnes Gregson. I think this is our 4th or 5th preview, and we're pretty excited that haven't had very many changes since the last
working here.
preliminary review of financial budget. At this time, Barnes is going to present a short slide.
Okay, good morning, everybody. This is a brief presentation of our draft final budget for fiscal 2024. We pretty much covered all of this information in the previous meeting. So I'm going to go through here and just kind of go through the highlights of the fiscal 24 budget. Final version compared to the preliminary version that we have been looking at. There have been no changes to our revenue expectation for next year at 51.2 million. No changes to our estimated cost of employment at 19 million. However, we did have a couple of items that impact that a little bit. We did get our final billing for our workers' comp premium for fiscal 24, and it was actually a little lower than what was in the preliminary budget, but the preliminary budget was not changed. One factor that's still outstanding with the workers' comp is we have to do a payroll reconciliation after the end of the fiscal year, which basically compares what our actual payroll was versus what we told them our payroll was going to be, and they based our premium on that. So we may end up owing them more money, or we may actually get a refund. It usually works out, we owe them more money because our actual payroll was higher than what we estimated for the year. We haven't done that calculation yet since the fiscal year is not over, so that's still one of the reasons why the employment budget for next year didn't change. We've also added one person to the headcount, a power systems maintenance technician. We don't have anybody in that position now, so that position is still to be filled, and that will take some time to go and find somebody and fill that position. So it wasn't large enough to warrant changing the employment budget number for next year. Our non-salary cost did not change, still at 23.1 million, and net income is staying the same at 8.6. We will meet our 20% cash operating reserve requirement. We will be able to make our obligation to the capital reserve fund that we set up last year. And quite important, we will meet our debt service ratio covenant in fiscal 2024. So that's briefly where we are with the fiscal 24 budget. Any questions? I'd be happy to take them.
Is it ready to go to the board?
Yes, this is ready. Yes.
I have a question. Thank you. Let's see, it's on page 9, the disposal fee revenue line for 24 budgets, 39,600,000. Is it difficult to know how much of that revenue comes from member agencies versus non-member agencies?
No, it's not. And I have broken that out in the preliminary budget we did.
Did I miss that?
It's not in the budget package that you got. It was in the last presentation I did with the preliminary budget, but I can send that to you. It's all done.
Okay.
So as you would expect, the biggest part of the disposal revenue comes from our regional customers, and specifically Greenway San Jose. That is, far and away the biggest chunk of it. So it's kind of like the regional customers is about 2/3 of the revenue, the disposal revenue, and then the franchise or member revenue is about half of the other third, and then commercial accounts would be the other half of the other third. So it's about 2/3 of the regional. And then a third, or actually a sixth, would be from the member agencies, and a sixth from the other customers, commercial customers.
So you said you had those numbers and that was in the preliminary presentation, but wasn't in the preliminary.
I don't know if it was in the packaging. I know it was in the presentation, but I can send you that.
Yeah, I'd
detail.
appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, it would, I'm thinking that might be useful information. That would be maybe 2 or 3 more lines in the report, just having that.
Yeah.
That breakdown. I think that's good information to know where the revenue is coming from.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
And since you have the numbers already,
Yeah, I just like that,
great,
plug them in.
thank you.
Just a couple of questions on page 19 under fuels and oils. It says the cost of CNG fuel purchased and sold to green waste recovery for use in collection vehicles is projected to be $600,000. This expense will be eliminated once the district's landfill gas conversion project is completed and becomes operational. Do we have a timeline or a time for that?
We do not. That's all contingent on the quality of the gas that the landfill generates. So far it has been too dirty to sufficiently clean up to fuel standard.
I see.
On a reliable and consistent basis. We performance tested and have achieved the lower part of the fuel standard, but it's not what we would predict to be something that can be repeated every day.
So is that something that we have to have equipment to make to better that quality, or is it, how do we influence?
The
the
first and more direct, or the most direct way at this time, is to make improvements to the collection system in the landfill itself. And that's part of the challenge is making those improvements. We have a draft of the contract that will come to you in a short time to issue some work for those improvements that will probably occur in third quarter.
Okay, so we're working towards that.
Yes, but
Okay,
it's not a flip a switch, you can
Right.
do it tomorrow type circumstance.
right.
Yeah, short. Then what do you have to do to the landfill collection system to put scrubbers in or what?
No, it's to put new wells that replace old wells, which the old wells are not performing.
But that's a quantity issue, not a quality issue.
No, it's a quality issue as well, because the old well construction it is such that in some cases there's ambient air being pulled in to the system. And that's what's causing the challenges around cleaning the gas up. While a new well, you can isolate the collection at a deeper zone and only be collecting landfill gas. And you won't have the oxygens and the nitrogens associated with the ambient air conditions.
Sounds expensive.
Well,
Drill a whole bunch of new wells.
There will be new wells. It's difficult to differentiate what the purpose of the new well is, because there's an ongoing purpose for just compliance with the air regulations. So it's hard to differentiate how much of the new work is associated with making improvements to the gas quality, that are in addition to what normally would have been done on a normal, on a more common pattern of well replacement.
I don't understand. I'll give you some, put it on the side, talk about that. And I'm not processing what we're trying to do.
So try to express it a different way. All landfill gas collection systems need routine, well abandonment and replacement.
For regulatory purposes.
Yeah, and just to maintain the, collection,
Okay.
keep up with the generation. So, as more gas gets, generated, the wells either need to collect more themselves, or you need to add wells, so you have that additional collection capacity.
Is it common, does the fact that we're raising the altitude, the airspace of the older modules contributing to that problem?
That adds a definite, new condition, or a different condition that's not necessarily present at other landfills. So that is something that is aware, we are aware of, and we are, watching the conditions pretty closely to determine when we can't, intercept the older waste. The more difficult circumstance is the frequency of filling in an area being repeated. And so there's a zone on the landfill that gets filled, first 6 months of 1 year, and then another 6 months of a following year. That disturbs the collection wells that are in that location, and that pattern of repeating fill in an area that has wells tends to decrease the life of that well and require more well replacements.
What's your best guess on how long it'll take us to solve this problem and start generating gas for the trucks?
I think by it's just over a year.
Chisel that in stone.
Okay, thank you.
It'll probably need a second construction effort after this year's to address enough of the issues to.
It kind of makes me feel a little bit guilty, because we've been, we started talking about fueling all the garbage trucks with landfill gas, many years ago, and we haven't started yet.
Mhm.
So we're sort of taking credit for something we're not doing.
Mhm.
And Leo's accurate about that.
Mhm.
It probably came up around 2009 or 10, I imagine, as a discussion point, along with a series of other strategies that were being developed at that time, which I'll talk a little bit about with the update on the white paper.
Okay, anything else on the,
I do, Chair, just,
Did you have,
could
you have another question?
Yeah.
same item, same
No,
item. still?
yeah, go for it, go.
Just expanding a little bit, Guy, can you share a little bit of like how many wells we're talking about that will have to be disconstructed and then added, and then, do we have a rough dollar amount that we're looking at for that piece of that project to refine gas production?
There's roughly 10 of each, plus or minus, and it's a $500,000 plus type of effort.
Thank you.
the 1 year, $500,000? Add that to that rock quarry.
I just noticed also on page 19 and on the subsequent pages, there's lots of decreases in certain areas. So like hazardous waste disposal, you're projecting an 18% decrease. Like how do you anticipate an 18% decrease in hazardous waste disposal?
It's based partially on prior year historical information and what's happening in this current year. So it's probably more slanted towards what's happened in the current fiscal year.
So we just see it decrease and we just expect that it will
Expect
continue
it
on
to
that same trajectory.
Right.
Is it a decrease in revenues, a decrease in quantities? What kind of decreases are you referring to?
I don't know, it's just, it's the cost, it's a
It's
decrease,
the cost.
which would mean we're just taking in less waste.
We're probably getting less
Okay.
HHW material coming in.
Yeah,
It's about 332, but it's falling from here.
Is that a result, you think, of the community efforts to having hazardous household waste collection programs that we started a few years ago? They're reducing the amount of stuff that's coming out here that's
And,
picked up and.
yes. Yeah, so in addition to what we do here, there's other outlets for you to do that. So like fluorescent bulbs can go to Home Depot. You got battery collection locations and stations that are maybe set somewhere else. So
oh, I
you
see,
do have different options, and the hauler will provide some of those options as well.
and that don't necessarily come here, so
Correct.
it's just spreading out the hazardous waste.
Yes.
Okay, all right. There's also a decrease in public awareness, education and awareness, and then also a decrease in safety equipment, supplies and services. I'm just wondering, like, I view those areas as really important. Why
Well,
the decrease?
the public information. Last year's budget, we put in a pretty big number for SB 1383 costs without really knowing exactly how much it was going to cost.
Mhm.
And based on, what's happened in this fiscal year, I think, the fiscal 24 number is probably a more accurate reflection of what's going to happen going forward. But last year, we were probably over cautious in putting in the number.
Okay,
And the other item was the
safety equipment.
Safety equipment. Yeah, I think that's kind of a carryover from the previous couple of years when there was a lot of COVID related
Mm,
expenditures for safety equipment, and we don't have as much going into that in that area now.
Just to add to that, we did add a station on top, so we'll have expenses where we incur one time only, and then we don't have that same expense next year. So we have a spotter station that we added this year.
mhm,
That's an example of a piece of equipment that will be a one-time expense, and we may not see that for several years until there's a replacement or a need to repair or fix.
mhm, mhm.
You may see that post on LinkedIn
Yeah,
about the new spotter.
Mm,
so it's a spotter station, it's secured, it's a platform area. People are able to drive up to the side of it, mainly the semis and the transfer trucks and the haul trucks. And it's keeping them in a safe designated area. They're no longer boots on the ground where they're roaming around. So they're in a pretty much refined square area, but it does reduce the amount of hazard up on the face of the landfill.
Right.
We'll look at other opportunities. We have traffic control guys that are on boots on the ground with inbound traffic and outbound traffic. So we may look at further solutions that may require some additional cost, but those are examples that sometimes we'll spend a little bit more in that year.
Mhm.
Following year, that one-time expense will drop off and we won't see it.
Mhm. Good, thank you for the explanation.
I believe our action is to recommend approval to the full board for this.
And then just one more on the mobile equipment.
Sorry.
On the mobile equipment, talking about, getting new things. We don't have any policy in terms of purchasing electric.
I don't think we don't actually have a
Equipment when-
formal policy. However, we are looking more towards CNG powered vehicles. And I don't think we're really looking at too many electric. I think we have an electric forklift or two that we're looking at, but as far as the big trucks.
The forklifts to electric,
Okay.
the big stuff is not available.
It's
yet.
not available, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I just have a general question. Has in the past been any effort to ask throughout the organization for cost saving ideas? It's not something you do all the time or every year. I'm just wondering,
Oh, yeah.
does that ever happen? And
Yeah, we look at, one example would be the safety vests. Our uniforms have all the stuff incorporated, so it's redundant to have a vest over a safety shirt, so that was the biggest, reduction. We look at productivity, we have, that camera that we have on the back end. Tells us what we're missing, we can tweak stuff, so, we look at our staffing. Reducing our overtime by having the person to bring the overtime down. So a lot of little things that we do. And that's usually the department heads that bring those to us.
We haven't solicited direct or, information or, from the employees for.
Yeah,
the item you
that's
mentioned.
what I was just wondering, if it's just widespread, anybody in,
We do have places where people can make suggestions about, as Jay said, anything. Whether it's, safety related or equipment related or manpower, anything. And as he said too, those usually flow up through the department heads. Because each department tends to have
And during
meetings
the
with
budget
the
process,
employees.
we're meeting directly with the department heads, the supervisors, getting feedback. We continue to review it, Garth and Helen are usually the identifiers of the one-time expenses and really trying to narrow down what that is. And then that's where ideas come in. Well, what if we did this and what if we did that? That's where our assumptions come in, and that's where we feel where we bring that additional request for our budgets to be incorporated into it. So we are, but maybe we can go a little bit further with Zoe's help and just look for requests from our employees, directly.
I was just wondering, and it sounds like.
And it goes everything from safety, that's part of Shack, was part of our goal to reduce our claims and reduce accidents, so. It can have a financial impact and also can have a safety impact, so. Most of they don't come from us, they come from the field.
Okay.
We have a safety committee. And a lot of that stuff comes from those guys, so yeah, we do get a lot of input from the field.
Fantastic.
There's suggestion boxes all over the site.
Yeah, well,
So, and as a matter of fact, I believe HR is getting ready to replace those suggestion boxes for bigger boxes. So,
well, bigger boxes. I mean, just asking the question, verbally makes people know that, hey, I'm open to hearing it. The old suggestion box in the corner of the room.
With the shredder on the bottom.
Boy, that's real old school.
Well, most of the time, the reason they're there is for when employees want to put something confidential, so HR is the
Oh,
one that
yeah,
opens
that's it.
those boxes. So, and then they forward it to whichever department.
I do think this is a great idea, especially ahead of next year's budget. Maybe we can incorporate more of the staff in the budget planning process early on by bringing in suggestions for managers and supervisors. So that's something we can consider. And also it helps with employee buy-in, to the projects and everything, we're hearing directly from all levels of staff. So
Any more questions on the budget?
No.
Motion to recommend approval to the board? I'll make it.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, discuss drafting closure, post-closure reserve policy. I have to comment on this. I really don't, first of all, I still question the wisdom of planning for something 130 years in the future. I see the most benefit from having a post-closure reserve pile of money is that 50 years from now, we need a few bucks, we just borrow from the closure fund. Because right now, like I say, I've said it before, I really don't think this place will ever close. Just doesn't seem in the cards, but less and less trash is being generated, more and more recycling going on, better practices out there. It just doesn't seem like, I guess that's my editorial there. I just don't see it spending a whole lot of time and effort on this process.
Is there staff report? There's nothing in.
No, there is not, but
It's just open for discussion.
it was an item that we wanted to bring back to this board. We feel that there is some responsibility that exists today. I think the minimum criteria that the state holds us to is the $1.5 million dollars to have in a closure fund or set money aside for a possible closures. It's 1.5 million. It's the minimum criteria that would not suffice if we had to close today. And one of the reasons why it was very important to the staff is that during some of our sessions that we had, we kind of feel the same way. This is 100 years of life. There's a lot of time left before we have to make a decision on closure. But in that particular meeting, we heard, well, what if legislation changed and they forced you to close? Would you be prepared to close? And I wasn't really prepared for that response or comment. And we are not prepared if we had to close because of legislation or environmental or any other state regulatory or federal regulatory that would come into effect. And I don't think we're near that point. But if it did happen along the way, would we be prepared? And at this point, I would have to say that we would not. And I think if we just modestly put something away, whether it's 1% of the gate rate, 0.5% of a gate rate, 0.25% of a gate rate, it would at least start the movement to procure and save a little bit for that day if it happened. And to Leo's point, it could be access for any other event that we have. So I think that there should be a balance. But we wanted this committee's feedback on how we felt about it, how much effort should we put into creating it and continuing the push to develop these reserves that allow options and opportunities for ReGen to take in the future based on having the ability to have a reserve for whether it's a project, equipment, and now a closure. And for most private entities, they do that day one. They're already setting money aside for a closure so that it doesn't fall back on shareholders or any communities that they have an agreement with. And so that is kind of the overlay of what we're looking at on this policy. And I know Helen prepared a little bit of a couple of slide decks that we may want to look at before we get into a deeper discussion. But just from 2020 hindsight, I would agree with Leo. It could be a very long time before we would have to dive into this policy. But I do feel the fiscal responsibility of this organization to push on something minimal just so that we can start creating a fund that would have more value than 1.5 million for a potential closure of any sort. Sound?
Did you want me to go up there? Or?
That's up to you.
She's either driving that.
There we go.
Thank you. So just a little background, it's been 57 years since we received the first piece of trash that has gone into our landfill. And since that time, the remaining disposal life as of today is estimated to be just a little higher than 100 years. And that's based on the expiration of the green waste contract in 2037. So at that point in time, 2037, the amount of landfill will start decreasing tonnage. And as Felipe had alluded, we have $1.5 million in cash. It's part of the restricted cash that we currently hold on the books right now. It's held there with the reserve for the capital projects, our reserve for debt requirements, and the 20% operating reserves. So, and to date, we have, other than that reserve set aside, has been no funding mechanism to broach the subject foreclosure and post-closure events. We also file the financial liability, which is the Form 114 with Cal Recycle. And currently on our books, we have $7.1 million accrued liabilities for closure and post-closure expense. That's not to say we have $7.1 million of cash. It's a liability that's accrued. We have currently right now, if to close, we would have enough to pay that, but that's not the full closure and post-closure costs. The item, you go to the next slide, please. Oops. So just a couple definitions. Closure is when we close, we stop collecting, we start preparing it, capping it, putting the liners in, putting all the required infrastructure for maintenance with a approved final closure plan. And partial close is when, when we start processing the final liner over and then we're closed. So in discussion with Guy, we can close modules one at a time, but we can also do it as a whole. And it's probably more cost effective to do it as a whole versus one module at a time. And post closure is when we're totally closed, it's ready, there's no activity, no nothing, but we have a 30-year maintenance cost. So right now, when we are looking at the closure cost, it's estimated to be about $15 million for us to fully close, of which 7.1 is currently accrued, and that will continue growing over the years to 50 million, possibly higher, depending on cost structure, legislation, and everything else. And then the post-closure cost is estimated right now at 15 million. So that's roughly $65 million. So is there another slide item? So what we're asking today is maybe, or our discussion today is, how do we develop these closure reserve policies and post-closure reserve policies? So as I alluded earlier, it's $50 million in today's dollars. And so, there's several ways to go about it. We can do an annual contribution, we can do a flexible annual contribution. We can, in which case we would designate the funds in a secure investment. Maybe what we can do is, if we put it in a separate fund, any monies therefore adds to whatever is being reserved, and it's restricted only for that. Keep in mind, the restriction is really truly just a designation, because that designation in lean times, the board can say, oh, you know what, we need some of that money for something else at this point in time. So it's not a true restriction in the sense of the word, because it's not restricted by outside or legislative restriction. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, this slide is really a preliminary proposal. If a reserve policy and for closure and post-closure was desired by the board, this proposal would be similar to what the board approved for the capital reserve policy. So it's a specific approach. The discussion here, if I'm following the tone in the room, may begin with, does the board adopt the reserve policy or not for closure and post-closure? I think that's maybe the starting point. And then if there's an affirmative answer to developing reserve policy, then the discussion would go into, well, what kind of features does it have? What does that mean as far as the funding rate? I think it's open for discussion at this time. I think we should go through that that step process. Because
So for most landfill, from what I've gathered and what I've read so far, that funding mechanism has started from day one. And the district has not done anything to start that moving forward and giving the life of 100 years. It was like, oh, that's way beyond life, But at the end of the day, we have to think about the future as well. So it's just the same thing, probably coming up sooner or sometime next year, I'll be coming back with a reserve CalPERS. So actually putting it in a trust, which we truly restricted just for CalPERS. So,
Yeah,
Just to kind of give some historical background of this topic in California. The state adopted requirements for financial assurance around closure and post-closure after having experienced a number of abandonments, I'll call them, facility abandonments, by more so on the private side because it was more difficult to chase the private parties to recover financial damages, but also some public facilities also went bankrupt. And in those cases, there was little or no savings to address the needs of closing and post-closure care of landfills. And so that was the source of why the regulations were developed. That, that's the state is trying to protect the public's financial interests around not being responsible financially for closing and post-closing a facility. And that's the regulatory background. I was trained in a different way than is present here, and so I've developed separate personal opinions around the matter.
let me ask a question. Locally here, we have two fairly recent landfill closures, Holon Road and Crazy Horse. Did we learn anything from that? Is there anything to be learned from those more recent closure actions?
Yes, there certainly was.
Holon Road is a piece of crap. It's bad. I mean, I built it like, that's it.
If taking the generalities of the situation of your question.
Yeah, I mean, they had to go through a post-closure activity. And that cost some money and it hasn't been 30 years yet, so I assume it's still ongoing.
Yes. So the planning, design, permitting process around these matters is straightforward. And so the lessons learned, I think, are more financial in that the agency was not prepared for the liabilities that were present. And those addressing the financial needs is occurring over time. It could not be done immediately. And so that they're actively managing post-closure, but they're also collecting funds that they didn't have that were needed and need to be repaid.
unfortunately for them, they still have one active landfill. And in our case, we wouldn't have another place to turn.
And there's always a regulatory issue that says that today you can cover it with dirt, but then in 100 years from now, you have to cover it with kryptonite. Go ahead.
Is there an industry standard? Like if you're gonna look around and look at policies that other landfills have? So for this,
I'm not the expert, but right now, what is required is what we have on our books, the 1.5.
Right, that's from the state though.
That is what is required, but other than that, I.
so if you look around, so other landfills, do they have these policies and
Private is probably putting about a dollar of whatever the
Yeah,
tip fee is aside for just post closure and closure.
I can show him. I've got a lot of experience there. I was 20 years in private. I think the difference, I don't know of a standard public practice. I have a lot of knowledge about the private waste management companies practice and less so about the other private waste companies. The privates, all, recognize that the liability begins when your ownership of the landfill begins or when you receive permit. So that's one key factor. So, you know, for the district that was it was in 1965. The permit was issued and as the landfill gets permitted and the permit modified, that defines the size of the landfill and thus influences the size of the liability that's present. And so it's recognizing the liability and then answering, is that liability suitably funded? I think is more the issue here. Helen referenced the minimum requirements that the state has, but that's just to allow operation to continue. It has very little to do with funding all the work that's necessary to close the landfill. That's design, permitting, and construction of the final cap liner system. And those are significant projects. If tomorrow the district had to close, there's probably a $10 million liability there to close this landfill. And that's, so that's 20% of the total liability, because the total liability is associated with the 315 acre landfill. It's unusual to not, recognize the liability beyond the minimum requirements, certainly after 57 years of operation.
Yeah.
And, the private companies are charging more like $5 to $10 a ton for the closure piece. And to all the customer charges. The post closure is more like 50 cents to $2 as far as a rate.
But these are landfills that have a shorter lifespan than we have. For the most part, I think.
Well, certainly because it's unusual to have such a long lifespan, but recognize that it's a per ton rate. So the amount of tons that go into the landfill is one factor. And that affects, that the rate of disposal affects the life, and all that's in a financial calculation to kind of determine what the rate dollar per ton rate will be. So, the district, and said another way, the district has missed 57 years of opportunity to, fund a portion of this liability. It has the fortunate situation to have quite a long life ahead of it. and quite a number, tens of thousands of tons more to dispose. So, its per ton rate could be, fairly low, for those kind of reasons.
Are you thinking about a dollar figure that you wanna throw against the wall here?
My suggestion is to maybe start with a lump sum approach. Of $500,000 a year for closure and $150,000 a year for post closure. And, have the policy that's flexible, that allows changing that amount over time. And, as the JTD and for the landfill gets updated, that will incorporate any ongoing changes around the closure, the closure and post closure elements that might affect the cost.
Is that recommendation also include the fact that this is not being restricted? Not restricted?
It would be a designated, it would not be in a true sense restricted because it's not restricted by an part of it's internally
It's
restricted.
accessible, in other words.
That's correct. The board can undesignate it.
Okay.
I fully support a policy that establishes a reserve for closure costs and post-closure expenses. I think ignoring that, the fact that eventually this landfill will close and the organization will change is not prudent or responsible for the members of this district. I know this may be an emotional, and not a pleasant exercise, but I'd like, I think it needs to factor in the volumetrics. What's the current landfill disposal rate? What's the total volume after it's all fully developed? That should be pretty straightforward calculation. How many years? And then estimate what the cost would be today, and then do the accounting. Do the finances. And just as important as that is, I think, is the conversation over when. And as was pointed out, there's two paths. One is the volumetric closure, and the one is the legislative closure. I'd like to hear what Mayor Delgado has to say about when Marina would like to see this landfill close, because I think that's inevitable, that Marina will grow to the north, take over the former Armstrong Ranch, be knocking on the door. And I think that's not a fun conversation, but I think it's a conversation that we need to have, and maybe the organization will change. Recycling, it's this industry is in such a state of flux, right? Legislative and technology wise. So I think this conversation over years needs to reoccur.
Yeah, I'm in support, what Bill said as well. I think there's no question that we're gonna have liabilities moving forward, and we are the ones creating those liabilities now, and therefore I feel like we should sort of own up to that. I like the idea of putting, and the benefit that we have is that we do have potentially 100 years to do this, so we're not. And that's the time when you want to plan, right? Because when you're not pressured. And so if we can do a little bit at a time for, a great length, I like the idea of having something that's not restricted, that's a little bit flexible because there may be changes. So no, I'm also a full support of moving forward with this type of policy.
I don't know if this is even possible, but it would seem to me that you could probably buy insurance policy for this purpose. And the insurer would be looked at it as a 100-year out liability potential. You could probably get a premium $10 a year, you know, something like that. Anyway, so I guess we are looking toward, I guess we're not ready to recommend it yet, we're ways away. But the numbers that you mentioned seem reasonable and unrestricted kind of a reserve, so I would also support that.
Would you like us to bring this to the board this month or to,
Or come back to. the
or
committee
come
with-
back to the committee with a draft?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, why don't you come back here?
Yeah.
Okay. And that way then we'll develop more details, so you have more to comment on.
Yeah, I like that.
All right.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? Does this district have any responsibility for or liability for or involvement with the former landfill that's over east of York Road and over above the golf course there? Because I remember there's been times, I can remember going out there when it was breaking out with flames and had the fires had to be put out. Did they have a post-closure plan or are we part of it?
I would think we'd be enough to switch the positions of who's asking the question. I've not heard of anything around that topic. Have wondered about that question.
Yeah.
And so maybe, we can decide how to coordinate with you about how to look into that history.
And we don't want anyone knocking at our door looking for us.
Right, it's, wow.
But it was not our organization that did the York Road landfill. It was
Well,
not the Monterey Regional Waste Management District, it was something else.
That's a good question.
it certainly, it may be, and it's certainly overlapped in time. In the same time period, the district was already formed,
Starting, yeah.
but it may not have had as direct a relationship as we might have perceived.
Yeah.
So we'd have to look into.
Yeah.
It was a leased facility. And so obviously, when the lease was finished, we were gonna take, whoever wasn't gonna take the waste bill back. So there must have been something in the contractual arrangements between the parties that.
And Seaside, we had to dig that one up and rebury it. That's landfill.
Okay, just wondering, I don't, we don't want to look for trouble, but it might be nice to know if there's something out there.
Okay. Very good. White paper update.
May I just point out, we have, what, 35 minutes left,
Yes.
and we have 3 items. Are there any items that should be deferred to the next meeting?
No, I think we can get through, depending on how much time we spend on the white paper, but I think the white paper is in order to be discussed. We have the surplus equipment that will take less than 5 minutes. And the waste of connections agreement, we've already seen that as well, and we've created a little summary of what the net revenue assumption would be after the total, so that should go very quick as well. So we got about, I'd say, a good 20 minutes on white paper discussion. Yes.
Okay.
If you want, like, to take that much, I can try to shorten this
Sure.
presentation.
And I can just start with the introduction. We started off with the original white paper author. It gave us a kind of regional view of what landfilling is doing. We wanted another piece of that, which is what we're doing here at our landfill. And that's kind of been the narrative. Guys kind of taking that piece. He's been here probably the longest. Everybody in this room are pretty close to it. With the past practices, other than Mr. Leo. But just looking at that, I think it comes at a good point. We wanna, Mayor Peak, you've seen a lot of demonstrations from us to really put out there the volume that's coming from member agencies, regional agencies. We did a broke down, we put pie charts in the last assumptions and presentations to really kind of give a good view of why our financials are as good as they are and why our expenses are being shared over a larger umbrella. I think it gives us a lot of those connections. This white paper is the attempt to give that same explanation for new members that come on, for public that join, that are trying to figure out why do we take regional tons? Why do we do what we do here at our facility to benefit our community here locally and benefit the cost to the member agencies at the same time. So this is been a work in progress, and we're going to be looking at board feedback so we can come back, make some final edits, maybe bring that back as a final, and then get it to our board for a final adoption and approval. So, Mr. Guy.
Sure, next slide. Can you move that bar up to the top? So as Felipe mentioned, there's the two parts that are planned for the white paper. Part one is what you've already read and provided comments to, which is more the state of affairs in California and regionally. You know, that identifies the common practices of waste being delivered to different counties and you know as a common practice. Somewhat depends on where the landfills are and what waste materials are involved, but generally there's a limited regulation around the movement of waste, both in the state and interstate. Part two is the part that's being added, which is to provide some background about district practices around what wastes are being received here at the district and from what sources. So next slide, please. So this is kind of an overview of part two, the history associated with this topic. Really kind of begins around mid-2000. When the board declined a $5 a ton disposal tip fee increase and guided staff to take some cost control measures in that year. And then the following year, there was an approval of a rate increase, but it came with guidance from the board to develop a strategic plan that would include a financial strategy to diversify the revenue sources, broaden the customer base, and seek operational efficiencies. That plan was initially drafted in 2007, and it included adopting some guiding principles around providing services to regional waste customers that weren't present at the time. In 2008, one of the operational efficiencies was enacted, where the districts significantly reduced its soil borrow operations, soil movement, and delegated a portion of that to a lease contract with Don Chapin, whereby they would do mass excavation. They would process sand for resale purposes. The district would receive royalties on those sand sales. There was also asphalt and concrete recycling services added that Chapin would do, and there were royalties coming off those sales as well. 2009, the regional contracts approach started occurring for customers in Santa Cruz County. So Santa Cruz County itself, Capitola, Scotts Valley. What else?
Wassonville.
So it came a little later though, I think. Both Capitola, Scotts Valley. What's the
County.
And
County of Santa Cruz.
Yeah, okay. So those, some 30-year contracts were approved by the board at that time. For those customers. And by 2010, the concepts around the district-wide collection service RFP to try to deliver some financial or operational efficiency and thus some financial benefits to the member agencies to have a district-wide collection service. So that RFP idea was initiated. Also planning for the truck yard and the MRF improvements began at that time. Next slide, please. In 2013, the board approved the disposal service contract with Green Waste Recovery for the post-process residuals from the San Jose MRF, serving San Jose and some of the South Bay communities. The RFP went out for district-wide collection services in 2014. And the truck yard was included as a facility that the bidders could rely upon as part of their bidding process. And in that element there provides the opportunity for a more head-to-head competition among the collection contractors. Because it's no easy task to have a land and a facility for a collection service in California in general, and a little more challenging in Monterey County given the size of the county and somewhat the unbalanced concentration of population in the northwest part of the county. Let's see, the 2015 bullet item is not correct, but basically by that time, the contract for the truck yard had been issued, and so development of the truck yard was occurring then. And as you can see, there was some subsequent approvals by the board that has led to what the situation is today, which Garth referred to earlier as being a predominantly revenue stream that's outside the district. So other parties providing revenue to together with a smaller amount of revenue from the member agencies and commercial customers to support all the operations here at the district. So next slide, please. This is just the tip fee history. And that 2005 point is right here. And basically you can see there was many years of not having a tip fee increase. And then the tip fee increase in 2004, and then another ask in 2005 that got deferred, and the staff was then sent this pathway to develop the broadening the customer base, diversifying your sources of revenue, and gaining operational efficiencies.
At about that same time, the district adopted a different policy whereby annually, staff would come to the board asking for some specific increase in tip fee. And we modified the policy to be automatically put CPIs on it.
Hmm.
And which didn't require specific board action.
Yeah. That's good to know. Next slide, please. This is kind of a tabularized representation of the transformation. The top three the tables are kind of the before and during the planning process of diversifying revenues, sources, broadening customer base and gaining operational efficiencies. And then the second three are more the implementation of those activities, trying to deliver the elements of the plan. You can see headcount increasing through here. And then you see kind of a decrease occurring across this time frame. Next slide, please. And that information, or some of that information, is represented here graphically, with the blue being kind of the average disposal ton per day. In this column here, and then in the blue bar chart. What, if we also had the employee headcount here, you would see that, in this year, 740 tons per day. We had a higher headcount than we have today. We'll have 1,700 tons per day. And that's reflected also in the revenues collected per ton and our expenses per ton. Here you see up to 2007, a trend where those revenues per ton and expenses per ton are increasing. And so that's parameters showing kind of the cost of business on a unit rate basis. And then the amended measures of the strategic plan started to get implemented, and you see that trend reversing. And so, today or 2017, we're collecting around $63 a ton in revenue, which is about 30% less than what was being collected 10 years earlier than that. And from an expense standpoint, 2017 expense was $59 a ton, while that too is about 30% lower than it was 10 years earlier. So this information represents the positive financial impacts that increasing your base of customers, diversifying the source of revenues, and gaining operational efficiency through contract for practice cause to occur here in the district. That's what part two is, kind of an overview, the presentation of what part two will contain.
And
Would love to have a copy of the slides and hope to see the part one revised and part two.
Mayor, does it capture
Well,
what kind of
it
what?
wasn't, it's
What-
not in the packet.
No, but does the information that's being presented,
aligned with.
Well, aligned with what you've been looking for is that global view of what's going, I think. Other board members have seen the need for it. Kim definitely says, when we get white paper, I've heard
Yeah.
Bruce say it, when are we gonna get white paper? Does it capture the historic evolution of where we're at today to answer some of the questions that you may get asked from the public?
Based on just what I saw, I think so.
Yes.
You might mention the fact that before we started taking outside waste, our cost per disposal cost per ton were going higher and higher. After we started taking outside waste, they started dropping, only because we had to process everything that we generate locally. The outside waste is buried. At the time we did it, it was costing $28 a ton. The buried, we were collecting $50. What a deal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Brandon.
Okay. Any other, I guess we provide no other we mentioned as far as directors.
We'll come back.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Surplus equipment. Getting rid of same.
We'll come back to the committees
Okay.
with the text portion. Updated and have incorporated information like this.
I say again, declaration of surplus equipment.
Yeah, and that's just a little bit of spring cleaning, stuff that we had upstairs, up in the shop. That no longer needed, so, you'll see items listed there, some old exhaust systems. Electric lift that, is outdated. So we just like to, surplus those and then dispose them.
Okay. Is that gonna be an action item for the board?
Yes,
Okay,
Consent.
we'll put it on consent.
okay. On consent,
Yes.
perfect. Gold Canyon Processing Facility Agreement.
Thank you, Chair. I passed out and distributed the Gold Canyon summary. Jay and Garth worked on the summary itself, and then we'll get through it fairly quickly. When you look on the first page, when you look at the cover page, it'll give you the assumption on the total program tons. It's about 1,500 tons that we will process over that 2-week period was the request. And Jay, has some assumptions that maybe it'll go 3 weeks. We did put the agreement to be for a year's period. And that would be, so if there was another instance around this and we use the same text, that we would have the ability to do so if it ever arose again. At this time, it was kind of a blanket. We didn't know whether it was gonna be 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and we said, well, why don't we just extend it out for a full year if we needed to do anything other than what's been the initial request. The second table shows the average. Jay and the team from Gold Canyon performed audits, audit assumptions on the value per ton. And you can see the average for those 3 audits was about $218 a ton for material value. When you put in the cost for the MRF processing cost, the transportation cost, and the loading cost, it was about $132 of the 218, which left you a net revenue of $86.67. And the assumption for the total volume that we would process of the 1,500 tons is roughly about $130,000 in additional revenue for that 2-week period of processing additional volume and doing and performing a favor for.
So is it $65,000 per week that we're doing that?
Correct.
Anticipated revenue?
Yes.
I believe the $55 transportation cost. So are we paying for them to bring it to us?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm lost on this. The cost side, the $67 is what represents
The burn. The burn.
That's us processing
Yes.
their material. So
Per
it's how much it
ton.
costs us.
Per ton.
I thought the agree, and how much are we collecting per ton?
218.67.
This is the average right here.
Okay,
Oh, do we have another one?
all right, because I'm looking at the recycling agreement, it
This
says
is the-
$10 per
I
ton.
gave him a sheet.
It
You
says
have
10,
this?
That's
You go
that's
take-
what we're gonna pay.
Yeah,
them.
here you go.
We're gonna pay them $10 a ton.
He has that, yeah. But he's looking at the contract.
Oh,
yeah, so the $10,
Is the loading, cost that Gold Canyon will accrue to load the trucks up before they're transported out here.
So that's, I think that's
that's
represented here.
not just my contract.
so the contract's only for the loading cost.
And they're giving us the material.
And yeah, that's the transfer of ownership that's occurring at loading. So the contract reads that the district will pay the processing facility $10 a ton to load the materials into transfer vehicles.
Hmm.
And at that point, the district's taking ownership of the material and thus is accruing the value of the material. And is responsible to process those materials for the customer.
So again, transportation costs, it only costs us $55 a ton to take an empty truck, send it down there. And then we pay them to load it, and then we bring it back.
Right.
I think there is a use of the opposite direction.
There could be.
Of the truck,
There's a potential backhaul that could bring that
Yeah,
down.
we-
Keep that.
Oh,
the
okay.
transportation is being subcontracted by the district to a third party.
Okay,
And that's the cost that the third party is quoting the
Yeah.
district.
got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's worst case, guy.
Oh,
Him
okay.
going down empty,
Empty.
coming back loaded. Keep they may have some stuff going down that way.
Okay, which.
But then, based on the timing
Mhm.
of when this actually happens, that's when we'll approach Keep Day and say, hey, do we have a backhaul for all of it or
Mhm.
some of it? So it could fluctuate based on the timing of the project,
Mhm.
but this is worst case,
Got it.
When's the anticipated start?
Mid-July.
In July?
And that's based on all the equipment being delivered at the site.
Mhm.
It's been delayed twice.
The commitments for 1 year.
Yeah. We may run into more delays based on.
Yeah, but it goes, it's like a lease.
Yeah.
You go month to month after a year.
Yes.
Is there any risk on the back end, the recyclable, the value of the recyclable stream?
Well, and that's always, the market, you'll see the market is based on our pricing.
Okay,
Yeah, that's all, we're always suspect of that.
You're basing your revenue based on historical data.
Today's pricing.
So if prices recyclables were to go up, this is fixed, so we'd actually
Yeah.
get more money.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, the dollars changing hands is $10 a ton. And that's to get ownership of the material and thus access to the greater value of the material.
Is that a legal requirement to actually purchase their garbage?
No, that was a negotiated, element. The negotiations began with, at a different, discussion around us charging the processing fee, them being responsible for transportation, some shared value or proportional value of the resale of the commodities. So that was a more difficult or complicated framework for an agreement. And
Why
it
don't we just do what we always do, is that they bring the stuff down and go across the scale and you charge them what everybody else did charge?
So this is short term around the maintenance of their MRF.
And,
And so it's, it has,
I guess they don't have transportation capability, but neither do we.
right, that they have access in a similar way that the district has access to transportation. Nonetheless, I think they, as an operator, were making decisions for themselves to kind of limit their activities during the maintenance period, so that they don't have to be involved downstream with that material. They can use their time around managing the maintenance of their facility and the operations that are ongoing there. So I think was a business decision on their part.
Yeah, and initially upfront in the initial discussion of processing the material, they wanted a share of the revenue value at the end of the day. And we negotiated strongly enough between multiple of us to eliminate that piece. So really, they didn't want to absorb the transportation cost nor that loading cost of their own personnel. So we took that assumption. That was the minimal assumption that we considered at that point. And we didn't share any of the potential revenue assumption of 130 grand. Initially, they wanted a portion of that back. And it just creates a lot of work on our side for a 2-week period to track it and then put it back out there. They took that as understanding. And that's when they said, hey, well, we'll just give you everything if you just pay for this. And they needed more the favor than the additional revenue.
Yeah, it sounds to me like this is more in our favor than their favor, which is an incentive for them to get finished and as quickly as
Absolutely.
possible.
Absolutely.
Right, and by not having a share on the profit, if, if the market were to tank, we have a buffer, we have a pretty good buffer in there for everything, and then on the transportation, we have the relationship with Keith Day. So having them handle the transportation, talking to Keith, or the coordination, it's better for us to handle it, right?
Sounds good.
This has to come to the board for approval, right?
Yes.
Anybody want to make that recommendation? I would. 3 for 3. All in favor?
I
Good. DM communication.
Sure, I have a few. And I got a couple minutes left, so I try to get through them. We do have the scale house project. Bids will be due June 8th of 2023. And the contract will be potentially awarded at the June board meeting. We also have our internship program that I mentioned last time we got started. So we have a new intern. She comes from UC Berkeley. Her name is Maya Macias. And she is our new engineering intern, and she's fitting right in, and she'll be here probably through the middle of August, beginning of August. And we wanted to continue the intern program. One, it's brought awareness for the jobs that exist here within our community. And I think that we have to stay abreast that we are really looking for candidates from our area, because that is the easiest transition for folks to get into a position here and not having to do a move like from Florida or from Texas.
Is she in your major?
Yeah, she's just completed her freshman year in the civil engineering program at Cal. And she is a local girl, woman, from Soledad, California.
Thank you, Guy. And we did have the public hearing. The notice was posted on June 23rd meeting. We also have the wellness program. This fiscal year coming up, we will have mini farmers markets on the second Thursday of the month for July, August, and September. We'll be providing fresh produce for employees to take home. This is part of the wellness program, and we'll be purchasing produce from local organic farmers. The wellness program includes a fall wellness fair, which will be held in October for flu vaccines, biometric testing, and wellness coaching, and other items that will be happening and activities during that week. So it is our strong push for the reminder of the well-being of all our employees here at ReGen. We also, the communications team received a resolution on Senate Bill 1383 from the Monterey County Board of Supervisors. That happened on Tuesday, and we're pretty excited of receiving that. We received it jointly with Salinas Valley Recycles. So we had representatives from ReGen and from Salinas Valley Recycles receiving the resolution. We also have Safety Month activities coming in June. It's National Safety Month. We'll be focusing on emergency preparedness in week 1. You know, we never know when we're gonna have natural disasters, chemical spills, heart attacks, anything that has urgency around it. Knowing what to do can essentially save someone's life. So we'll be practicing and focusing that in the next upcoming weeks. We already had some kickoff meetings, so we're pretty excited about that. And lastly, I wanted to share that we did have an incident at the scale house where we had a pretty serious incident where an irate customer, you know, really had very bad misconduct. You know, he attempted to pull a window open and throw some stuff through the little opening in the scale house. We were able to remedy the issue. It happened on a Saturday, and the essential customer went on his way. But with that happening, we do really want to focus on de-escalation and what we do in an emergency scenario, how employees can respond. So we'll be focusing a little bit on that. We thought it was important to share. It doesn't happen often, but we will be looking at working with communications and safety. Is how do we minimize that with long wait times, you know, sometimes causing an issue, some frustration that's created, you know, in the line with traffic control, and how do we mitigate that? So we will be focusing on, you know, what is the message we send to customers that are using the facility to have good conduct while they're here, and what do we do when they don't have good conduct, and do we allow them to continue to use our facility? Do we not? So we will work on some sort of plan, and we like to bring that back to either the personnel or the finance committee on, you know, what steps do we want to take when that occurs, and how do we mitigate misconduct from employees using from customers using our facility, and the misconduct that could happen throughout the facility, and what are we doing to mitigate that? So that'll be something of a priority for our agency in the next upcoming weeks. So
It seems to me that'd be more of a personnel committee interest item.
I agree. Thank you.
Ed,
Yes.
we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.